Hello and welcome to this screencast on comparisons between pairs of studies. This time we're going to be looking at the second lot of biological studies, which are Blakemore and Cooper and Maguire et al. Okay, so just as you've seen before, you will see where I've got some black writing up here and I've got some red writing. The black stuff has been done for you already. This should be in your booklets. But what I want to do is I want to go through this a little bit with you today, and just to give you a little bit of a hand with this, because these two studies, whilst they might look very straightforward, are actually a little bit tricky when you start to evaluate them and to compare them. Okay, so without any further ado, let's crack on then, shall we? So if we look at this similarity to start off with in the black, I put here that both studies used a standardized protocol to examine the behavior of participants. Okay, so again, I could have said something like both are reliable, they both produce reliable results, consistent because they have standardized procedure. I could have used that at mid there if I wanted to. But just simply saying that they use standardized procedures is absolutely fine, because that is definitely a similarity between them. Okay. Right, let's have a look at the difference then. Right, so even though they've used standardized procedures, there is a difference in the research methods. Okay, so the study used different research methods. So Blakemore and Cooper used a laboratory experiment, which involved directly manipulating the IV, and this was the visual experience of the kittens. Right, so if you remember in this particular experiment, you had kittens that were kept in a particular environment. There was two different types of environment, wasn't there? There was the hooped version, okay, so the stripes going horizontally, and you had the stripes going vertically, and otherwise they were kept in the dark, weren't they? So that was essentially their particular environment, and that was manipulated directly by the investigator. So that simply meant that what you've got there is an IV which has been manipulated by the investigators. Therefore, you've got a laboratory experiment. Okay, so what about Maguire then? Well, Maguire, even though it has standardized protocol, was a quasi-experiment design because of the fact that actually you've got two different groups of people who will naturally occur, and you have taxi drivers and you have non-taxi drivers. No one was manipulated into becoming a taxi driver for the study. That would have been a bit unethical, maybe. But there you go. So that's why that's a quasi experiment. So the IV was a matched pairs design, but it wasn't actually manipulated by the investigator. Okay, so that's the difference. All right. Now, just remember with both of those, then how we do these. These are P paragraphs. Okay, so you start off with your point. Okay, standardized protocol would be your point, wouldn't it? Then you explain a little bit further, maybe just say a little bit more about what you mean by a standardized protocol, and then simply give an example about the standardized protocol within the Blakemore and Cooper study, and then an example from the Maguire study. Okay, so what you end up with is a PEEE format for your similarities. With the differences, all you need to do is to throw in another E there. Okay, so you make your points. The studies use different research methods. There's your point. Okay, you need to say first of all that one of the studies used a laboratory experiment, Blakemore and Cooper. Explain what you mean by a laboratory experiment in its generic form, manipulation of the IV by the investigator. Then give your example of Blakemore and Cooper. So already you've got PEE. Then you need to talk about the fact that Maguire used a quasi experiment. Tell me what a quasi experiment is. So there's your next E, okay, and then you've got Maguire as your an example from Maguire, and why that is a quasi experiment will be your last E. So what have you done there? You've got a P, E, 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 E. All right, P with 5 E's. Good. Right, let's have a look at the red stuff then, shall we? Because this is where you might need a little bit of help. Okay, so if we're talking about similarities then, so let's start thinking a little bit more about APMIDs. Let's think about how we're going to use some of our debates to help us here. Both studies provide deterministic explanations for behaviour. Right, so remember, determinism is all about the fact that we don't have any free will, we don't have any free choice about what happens to us. Okay, there's something, either internal or external factors, which are controlling our behaviour. And this particular situation is our deterministic explanations of behaviour because brain plasticity was as a result of environmental factors. Now, brain plasticity is due to not just environmental factors. I guess you could say there is a predisposition in that you do have the brain structures to be plastic, if you will, okay? But it was the environmental factors, the nurture, which was actually causing that to happen. So you can see how those two things will start linking together. So you've got, say, a nurture type of explanation coming in here. There's a bit of nature and nurture, but this becomes a very deterministic explanation. No cat or no taxi driver has made a conscious decision for their particular brain structures to become different as a result of their particular the particular protocol that they went under. Okay, so this is the deterministic explanation. You can pretty much work out if it's biological, it's going to be deterministic. Okay, there's going to be a cause, an internal cause and an external cause in this particular situation. Okay, let's have a look at this one then. Okay, so the studies use different designs. These studies are very, very similar to each other actually, but you can definitely pull this one out. Blakemore and Cooper used a longitudinal design. Okay, so it took place over an amount of time. Okay, so the cats went through this process, didn't they? They were there for several months during the critical period, and it was the effect of that time which was being measured, I suppose you could say. Therefore, that's a longitudinal design. Okay, the Maguire study, on the other hand, was a snapshot study. I mean, pretty difficult, wouldn't it, really, to take people from birth and then to see which ones became taxi drivers and which ones didn't, and do it that way. But there is, I suppose, there's a bit of a longitudinal element in that the longer the taxi drivers were taxi drivers for, the greater the shift in the hippocampal volume. However, the actual study was a snapshot study in that the hippocampal volume was taken at a particular point in time. Okay, and there was kind of like a bit of a correlation back, I suppose, to see how the amount of time as a taxi driver had actually affected that. Okay, I'm waffling a bit with that, but I think you get the idea. Okay, so the studies use different designs: a longitudinal design for Blakemore and Cooper over a period of time, Maguire study, snapshot. Okay, just a particular point in time was measured. Okay, let's go through these ones then. These are similarities then, much easier to find the similarities with these two. Very, very similar investigations. Both studies support psychology as science. I'm sure you all probably thought that straight away. Support psychology as science. Why? Because they have objective measures, established and verifiable procedures. You could have linked that one really to the first one if you wanted to. You could have stuck psychology as science on that one. But, you know, if you can get more than one out of this one, then why not? Okay. Both studies provide nature and nurture explanations for behaviour. Predisposition, nature, due to the presence of specific brain structures, and experience of particular environments would be nurture. Okay, so they've both got the same sort of explanation for why it is that there was changes took place. And the last one I've got here, there's many more you could have got, I suppose. Both studies are useful. Right, so why are they useful? Well, Blakemore and Cooper, well, it could lead to treatments for human visual disorders. So now we know a little bit about early environments and how that might impact on the visual cortex development. We now could perhaps use that information to fix any issues with visual cortex disorders in humans, okay, potentially. And Maguire could be useful. Well, why is that useful? Well, if you have brain damage, for instance, we now know, don't we, that the volume of grey matter can actually increase through repeated use. Before Maguire, we weren't really sure about whether this change could occur over the lifetime. Face validity-wise would tend to imply that would be the case. However, we now know that is the case. So repeated use of particular parts of the brain may well cause those parts of the brain to re-establish themselves, to start working again. So there you go. So that's why it's useful. There are loads and loads of other things you could have got down, but I just wanted to share those with you just to make sure that you didn't get stuck on this particular studies or these particular pairs of studies, because it can be a bit more of a tricky one to do. Spend time going through that, make sure you understand it,